Thank, thank you. Do you hear me using this microphone, or is that okay? You hear me? Okay, fine. Then I don't need this one. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, everybody for coming. All my current friends and my future friends, those who I didn't know yet, but I'm still Boris Draznin for everybody. Anyway, thank you, Father Phil. Here's somewhere that opened the door of this congregation. And we are, oh, here you are, that's right, yeah. He also helped me with setting up all these slides and everything, so he's great, absolutely great. Thank you, Jeremy, for taking control over logistics of this course that we design, and obviously thank you to all the people who will be lecturing as well, or presenting as well. I'm kind of honored to be the first to open it up because we designed a course with a historical perspective from ancient history until today, how we can find common features between Judaism and Christianity in a history of two nations, two people that unite us rather than dwelling on some disparities or things that are different. And you can look at this photo, a picture that actually Jeremy found someplace. But that reflects what we want to do in this course very well. Both Judaism and Christianity come from the same origin, or the same roots that you can see, that helping those two religions, two people, firmly anchored on this earth, standing together. And over the centuries, the two trunks kind of separated initially. And that stayed separated for many, many years until recently, and I'll show you that in a course of what I want to say. But now you can see that branches and leaves intertwined and created a crown under which we all find the morality of our existence. And that's what kind of unites us. And that will bring us not only in a current time, but hopefully in the future, those common features of both things. So that we designed the series of this presentation to unite Christian and Jewish communities around those shared roots and values. And I will be talking mainly about history and what unites us, nothing about the separate things that may have happened during history or may have happened today, may still be happening. It's kind of, we'll leave that outside of the presentation. So what are those things that are really moral values and roots that unite Judaism and Christianity? We'll look at that together. It's obviously started with 10 commandments that became foundation of the moral values for both religions. Even though we will go thousands of years before those 10 commandments appeared, and we'll talk what else could have been prelude to those commandments. But that's what stayed. That both Judaism and Christianity valued the 10 commandments and built their life and morality around that. But the two religions were separate and were, as those two trunks on a tree, was kind of going apart rather than being together. It all changed, or overwhelmingly changed. There might have been changes before. There are some people who tried to unite those religions, but it really changed with founding fathers of this republic who used moral codes of the 10 Commandments and other laws of Moses to build not only Declaration of Independence, but also Constitution of the United States, many laws that accompanied that. And it became a turning point in which those branches of two religions started kind of coalesce together, creating a crown on which I will be sharing with you, talking with you. So Judeo-Christian principles not only serve as a foundation of Western civilization, but they constantly enriched Western civilization, making it the most advanced and prosperous civilization and history. And hopefully it will stay this way for many, many, many centuries ahead. So what that history is, and we'll just look together how it started with the area which is called in many books Fertile Crescent. You probably remember that, most of you. And it started from Mesopotamia, the area between Tigris and Euphrates River, just north of Persian Gulf, and goes all the way to modern southern Turkey, Lebanon, modern Lebanon, and modern Syria by the eastern shores of Mediterranean Sea. Then it jumps through kind of deserty place where Israel is today, but it's on the shores of Mediterranean Sea, and goes into Delta and along Nile River. If you can look at this, the timing, it's close to 5,000 years back, and they already had city-states in the Sumerian city-state, and it was 5th dynasty of Old Egypt. I will actually do a little bit of sidebars on almost a couple of every slide. So if you haven't been to Egypt, I would highly recommend to go. It's an absolutely fantastic place for buffs of history. It's just amazing what you see going so many years back. So that's where that Western civilization started. How do we know from that? We know from books of history. And what the books of history, it's a historian who look at the previous historians, to the previous historians, until they come maybe to some Greek historian on Josephus who wrote about antiquities. And that's how we more or less know that history of ancient times, plus archaeology. There's people standing on their knees and elbows and quietly digging in, finding all kind of artifacts that support what historians have written to us, or maybe changing our understanding of what the history was. So that's how we kind of find it. But one of the major documents of that antiquity time is the Bible. And people can argue that Bible may or may not be accurate historic document. And I'm not here to dispute that one way or another at all. But there are so many events, so many names, so many moral situations that described in the Bible that it's hard to imagine that it did not happen, that people just made it all up. Although the chronology or arithmetics of a Bible may not be precisely accurate as to when it happened. But what I want you to remember, that absence of evidence is not an evidence of absence. So if something is not found, something is not confirmed, it doesn't matter that it didn't really happen. It could have happened, we just didn't discover that yet. And some of these documents are there. So the most criticized part of biblical text is the not only chronology of the events, but the longevity of the patriarchs. And you can look from Adam, and I'm again not here to tell you whether Adam was created on day 6 or he was before or after. That is irrelevant to us because we will concentrate on commonality, what Jews believe, what Christians believe. And assuming that we all believe that Adam was the first person on earth, then he lived for 930 years. Quite a long life. And you look at all the 10 first patriarchs, including Noah, they lived for 900 years. Noah's grandfather, Methuselah, lived for 959 years. That's quite a longevity. One guy died early at 355 years. You know, that's poor guy. I don't know what happened to him. But regardless, those people lived long time. And that's what's critical about the Bible, that how can it be? But again, we're not here for that. We believe that some of these events, some of these people did exist, passed on to generation. And here's another sidebar of what I'm going to tell you, that presumably God had 6 covenants with people in a old life and a more current life with that. 3 of these people with whom God had covenants are here. One is Adam, which is a covenant of work, or something that he could have lived forever in a Garden of Eden if he did not disobey God and try that fruit from the tree of knowledge. And then that covenant with him was kind of broken in a way, and now he had to toil all his life to make a living, and he's no longer living forever. The other person with whom God had a covenant is Noah. He's a 10th on the list. It's a 10th generation of patriarch. And his covenant was after the flood, when God saw that all the bad people are gone and how much damage to the earth it was. He said, I will never use the flood to kill people or animals or anybody. So Noah was very happy, obviously, of that. He didn't need to build a second ark on that. And a third person was Abraham. And that's how our story starts today, because Abraham built a covenant with God on the basis of original monotheism, that he is the only God that Abraham has to obey and listen and follow. And Abraham was Abram at that point, and he changed the name to Abraham as from Sarai to Sarah. I want you to look at this slide for a second. This is Abraham. And unfortunately, at his time, there was no photography. So we don't really know how he looked like. So all the reiteration of different artists and cartoonists will just accept that that's the same person. That's Abraham. And Abraham had to live for about 600 years until laws of Judaism came to him. He lived with a covenant and with love and believing in God, but he really didn't have all the Jewish laws to be obeyed at that time. It came with Moses much later. And then we had to live for another 1,400 years until next the Christianity came about. So there was a long period of time. All those times sound in our mind like 500 years, 400 years, 1,400 years. It's a long time for everybody, for the many, many generations pass. And then eventually Islam comes in 600 years later. So here, the 2 probably, arguably, the most consequential words of the entire Bible. That's how it kind of started. That's how the Judaism started in a way. When God tells Abraham, Lech Lecha. We don't even know how to translate it exactly, because Lech is to go, and Lecha, go to yourself, or go someplace, or go far away from here. But there's 2 words that changed the world and civilization, because Abraham listened to that and understood that he has to leave his town behind, his father's house behind, his idolatry that was there prevalent in all the Sumerian city-states behind, and move on just into promise of 2 things, of new land that will be given to him and his descendant, and blessing to his descendant that he will become a father of great nation. And he believed in that, and that Lech Lecha, he went. How often you tell your kids, get out of here or something, and they don't listen to what they probably should have, and left your house for a while and then maybe come back at some point. But Abraham went. He took his wife, he took his nephew Lot, and he took some other people with him, a little bit of the family, and he left his father Terah in the town of Haran. Abraham, actually, the entire family lived in this town of Ur, I'm on your way, maybe? You okay? Okay. Town of Ur. I can move a little bit. And he left with the entire family to town of Haran, and he stayed there about 40 years and left. And his father stayed behind and actually died later on in that town. And so he went through Damascus to the Promised Land, and he ended up in Shechem. But then, after a couple of years, then there was a huge famine there, so he couldn't stay there. He had to move on with his family, and they moved to Egypt, to land of Goshen. And here's I'll tell you in a minute, an interesting moral dilemma that he had when he arrived to Egypt. And that would be relevant to us to understand the value of the Bible, that is not just a story of people moving from one place to another. So if you look at the Bible, and you can go to Barnes & Nobles and Amazon, you buy a bunch of children's stories, you teach them how to behave, how not to behave, what to do. But they're actually difficult elements of life described as well. There are brother killing brother. There are rapes. There are betrayals. There are adultery. There are all kind of stuff remaining there. Why is it there? Why is it still in the Bible? Because that's a human nature from which those moral codes then eventually arise to tell us what's good and what's not good, and how to behave. How do we need to behave? Because you're not going to read to your 5-year-old kids that one brother killed the other. It's not quite relevant to them yet. But so here's on the right-hand corner the picture of Abraham when he comes with Sarah to Egypt. And he thinks, by the way, he's 75-year-old plus something, 78, that his wife is so beautiful that Pharaoh will definitely take her away from him. And so they will kill him, because they know who needs a husband of a beautiful woman there? No one. And so he tells Sarah, let's pretend that you are my sister. And that will save my life. Which is, by today's moral code, not everybody would do that. And then eventually Pharaoh finds it out and kicks them out of Egypt. They return back. But this is the ways that morality is there. But yet, Abraham believed so much in God's world and in God's word that when he was told to sacrifice his only son, although Ishmael was there somewhere, but that's the only son that will produce the great nations, he believes that he should do it. And yet he probably believed that God somehow resurrect Isaac, that he won't lose it, because he should be a father of great nation. How he can be a father of great nation if he sacrificed his son on that? But nevertheless, he is listening to God, and his hand stops. That's by the way, again, as a sidebar, that's the Rembrandt painting that it's in Hermitage in St. Petersburg. So if you want to go there, not right now, but after all this Ukrainian-Russian things will subside, you might go there and look at this beautiful painting. Joan and Benny and us and Michael and Carol went there, and that was spectacular with that. Anyway, and now we come to probably the most boring character in the entire Bible, and that's Isaac. He didn't do anything in his life, that memorable, except he was almost sacrificial lamb for this. And then at age 40, 50, whatever he was, he found a beautiful wife, Rebecca, only to be deceived by her and their young child, Jacob. So he was so naive, nice guy, and that's his sort of role for us, is to create a next patriarch, Jacob. Otherwise, he was just nice guy in a Bible. But here he was old, didn't see well, didn't hear well, and so he blessed his son Jacob, who stole basically this blessing with help of his beautiful mother, Rebekah, at that time. The Jacob himself was not only hard worker, according to the Bible, but he was the man who actually gave Israel its name. Because of him, Israel is called Israel. Because of him, people of Israel are called Israel. It's Israelites, or whatever you want to call it. He, on the way back from his 14 years of working to get his wives, I'll tell you in a second, he was wrestling with a man who some people think was angel with the help of God. Some people say it's God himself. But that he got the name of Israel, which translates in a looser way, he who fought or wrestled with God and withstood that wrestling. He went and worked for, as I said, for 14 years, first 7 to get his beautiful wife, Rachel. But again, he was deceived. It's the deception in the Bible is all over the place. So we have to finally put it together, what's good and what's not good. And he got Leah instead. Oh, he had to work for 7 more years to get Rachel. So he got Rachel. But eventually he settled with 2 wives. And he didn't like Leah too much, but enough to get 7 children with her. But he also had 2 maids. Each woman had a maid. And Jacob had a pair of kids with each maid. You know, again, by today's standard, it probably won't last, you know. Governor Schwarzenegger had a child with a maid, and it didn't end well for him. So, but Jacob had a total of 13 children, 12 boys and 1 girl, and that's how that big nation began. The most important person in that story is Joseph, whom brothers sold to slavery in Egypt. Again, a moral story of how good brothers behave. You know, they picked up one who bragged too much and they sold him. You know, what's the point of having him around? And so he went to Egypt, but then when the famine came to the land of Canaan, everybody came to Egypt, and he opened to brothers that he's their brother and accepted them. And here's kind of interesting, another pivotal story in history of Jewish people. When they went to Egypt, there were about 70 people. And again, the record doesn't count women and children, so we don't really know how many. Well, it was time that women didn't count before suffragistic movement on that. But he went there with 70 people. They came out 600,000 men plus women and children. They were there for close to 400 years in Egypt, and then they really developed into nation. That they went as a family, they came out as a nation from Egypt. The person who led them out, here's in front of you, by the name of Moses, led them out of Egypt, as you all know. And they wandered 40 years through Sinai until they came to a land of milk and honey. The reason they were there so long is that he had bad GPS on his Apple phone. He could have made it much sooner than that, but nevertheless, he did that. And here's the next 4th covenant of God with people, and that's with Moses. When he gave Moses covenant of 10 commandments that really, from this point on, became the moral foundation of Western civilization. And they are there not to kill, not to be a false witness, to maintain relations with your parents, not to commit adultery, and the number one is to have God as the only God, and that point. But not only he brought 10 Commandments down to people, he also brought a law of what we call Mosaic law, Moses law. That is Torah. And what he wrote, it's the written Torah. So what's written in Torah since that time, it's all written the same thing. There's not a single word that changed, except there is a little bit at the Torah. There is an ending how Moses died that somebody else written it in. But other than that, it's all the same since those times. And he gave him oral law, because not everybody was writing at that time. Not everyone could. So there was oral tradition of law that was unbrokenly passed through generation to generation for over 40 generations, actually, for close to 500 common era time when the Babylonian Talmud was codified and written. So it was orally transmitted from person to person, and Moses was the first, presumably, who memorized it overnight. It must be a great memory of a guy he had, but I couldn't remember names right now, but it did. Now, let me go back for a second. Again, like a sidebar. We all say that 10 Commandments and the law created that foundation of moral codes. That's what's supposed to be. But if you go historically and archaeologically, you find similar things, similar codes, not the same, in the civilization that were preceding Hebrew time of receiving Torah and 10 Commandments. And one of them is 42 laws of Ma'at. And Ma'at is a princess and a goddess of truth, harmony in Egypt. And it was written about 2900 BCE, which is about 1400 years before Moses received his commandments. And there were 42 laws describe how to behave. And you can see them in the British Museum and the papyrus. You can look on the pyramidal text in the place that's called Saqqara that Sasha and Claudia and I visited several years ago, which is the oldest pyramids and where's a burial chambers of ancient pharaohs of Egypt. It's a spectacular place, obviously, that I think it's almost a must to go. I would say must, it's Egypt and Israel to see all those historical places for everybody. So that was there. Then close to 800 years later, there were Sumerian code of behavior as well. And there are 32 surviving laws. There might have been more, but 32 that you can see. It's actually an Istanbul museum. And that's written in Sumerian language, so you need a translator. Maybe a Google translator will do it, I don't know. But it really said that if man commits the murder, he has to be killed. If man commits a robbery, he has to be killed. So again, there is an attempt to bring morality in life of ancient civilization. And then the most known to everybody, it's a Code of Hammurabi that you can see in Louvre Museum. It's a 7 feet tall stele, and you go around and look at this 4,100 lines that describe 282 laws, how to behave, the moral. And eye for eye is right there. You can't read it, it's in a different language, but presumably somebody translated it, and that's what it is. It's one of the great attraction of Louvre, obviously. Everybody is running to Mona Lisa, but that's much older and much more interesting. But it's 282 laws. It's a lot of laws to do, but not for Jewish people. It's not enough. They came up with 613 laws that you have to obey. And that's where eventually separation will occur, that Christianity will accept 10 commandments, but will not accept that we need to obey all the 600 laws. Because these laws relate to what you eat, how you behave, when you pray, all sorts of daily living activities. And so that was put aside by St. Paul, who said you can become, for Gentiles, you can become a Christian just by grace and love. You don't need to follow those 613 commandments. But at that time, Jews came up with the 613 commandments to follow. And there also something that was kind of new for me when I was preparing and study for that, and that's Noahide commandments, which are 7, and I'm sure all rabbis know that, but I did a different path in life, so anyway, but those are commandments that are written everywhere in the Bible. They're not grouped together, and a lot of that is written in Talmud rather than in the Bible itself. But that 7 became 10 commandments for Moses, and on top of those 10 commandments to Moses, there are 613 laws that Jews presumably, or mitzvot they call them, they have to obey. So Judeo-Christian values that is basis for Western civilization came from those stories, morality stories of the Bible that eventually gelled into commandments that we have, and that share ethical and moral principles. The dignity of human life became evident from these biblical texts and archaeological discoveries. Importance of the family, that stays very important for everybody. Social justice, obviously, there, because eventually either people or God or something creates that social justice for ill and evil things that occurred, and believes in a high moral law. Now, Moses brought all these people out. Remember, there were 600,000 plus women and children. Nobody counts those, that's irrelevant. But here are the 12 sons of Jacob, for whom those tribes are called. Now, the interesting thing here is there are 2 kind of things. One is that Levi doesn't have any tribal land. So it's not 12 tribes, it's 11. Okay? That get. And Joseph, here he is, sitting on a throne, doesn't have tribal land either. So who has it? The 2 Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Those 2 Joseph's sons, so that's how it became 12 again. Because 12 minus Levi minus Joseph is 10, and plus 2 sons of Joseph, it's 12 again. So that's how they lived there, 12 tribes of Israel. At the time of external danger, they united. Otherwise, they really hated each other, most of them. But they united, and they selected a military and social leader at that time. And that was called a judge. And here's the 14 judges, and 1 woman made it. Deborah made it. And the last one, judge, is Samuel, who has his own books in the Old Testament. And at the end, when Samuel was a judge, they decided, you know what, it's difficult to choose a judge every so often. Let's just have a king, the one person who will unite entire kingdom of Israel, will be all together, and there will be administrative and military leader of that. And Samuel, people agreed, which is not an easy task for a Jewish 12 different tribes. But anyways, the Samuel anointed King Saul at that time. And King Saul was king for about 40 years. We'll move on fairly quickly. And the King David came, who was married to King Saul's daughter for a while, but then he became king, and he was probably one of the greatest king for mighty Israel at that time, and he was then succeeded by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. So we have 3 kings of united Israel. By the way, you can see 12 tribes of Israel in a Hadassah's hospital, in a synagogue, or made by Chagall. That's very, very impressive thing to see in Israel. Although it's hard to get there, there's no parking, there's whatever, but it's a very great place to visit. Now, King David, and here's another 5th, I believe, covenant that God had with people. And he said to David that from your lineage, from your descendant, there will be kings of Israel, and there will be a Messiah as well. So it's your descendant that will be kind of ruling the Israeli land. But King David was a shepherd, but then and happened to have a nice little sling, and there was a big guy in front of him. He swung that sling and killed him. And then all the Israel was so happy that big Goliath was killed, and they proclaimed David the king. But he was more than a king. He was a poet. He was a musician. He was really well-rounded guy for the time at that time that he was. And he was a great general. It probably was the best security for state of United States of Israel at that time. Nobody attacked him. He actually acquired a little bit more land. There was a prosperous time. And for all those achievements that he made, for everything, that he's such a great king, he now stands naked in front of Uffizi Museum. That's what people did to him, that Michelangelo. Made him naked to stand in Italy, in Florence. And you can go and see him there. But on the other hand, let me just show you. King David, so he wrote half of the Psalms, which is a huge number, that. He was from the tribe of Judah. He was a great son of Ruth and Boaz. You remember that story of Ruth and Boaz. Grew up in Bethlehem, which called by Luke, it's called Town of David. Don't confuse it with the city of David, which is in Jerusalem, attached to ancient old city of Jerusalem. But it's a town where 1,000 years later Jesus would be born, because he comes from the same lineage from that. And he was anointed there by Simon, as a king of Israel. He established Jerusalem as a capital of United Israel Kingdom. But he did a couple of things that God didn't particularly like. One, he was too much of a warrior, and he killed people himself with a sword. Then he committed adultery with Bathsheba and had her husband sent in a battle to get killed. So he could not build the temple to God for that reason. He was a little bit too bad of a boy, David. But that's another kind of story that not people, maybe except for Isaac, not unidimensional in the Bible. They all have good qualities, bad qualities, and then eventually they do something that we like or we follow on that. But his son succeeded him, and that's called the wisest king on earth, and King Solomon. He was, remember, deciding who was the real mother of a baby. And you all know this story. He was so wise, he said, cut this baby in half. And the real mother said, no, 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 give it baby to her, to the other woman. That's how he picked it up. So he was the wise guy. And he decided on the plans how to build the temple, because he was allowed to build the temple. And here's his architects and construction workers and all the people that deciding on the plans. The King Solomon was, as I told you, second son of David and Bathsheba. The first son died early, and so he became successor to David. He wrote a book of Proverbs, which is fables and wisdom of biblical proportion, to the point that we all reading it and say how true that is, how smart that guy was. He wrote Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, which is contemplation, self-reflection. He wrote Shir HaShirim, songs of love. That's a beautiful songs of love. And he built a temple in Jerusalem. The first temple was built by Solomon. Here's the model of a temple, another sidebar, but you know, we all. And here, when the temple was destroyed, first temple, and a second temple was built, then King Herod enlarged the second temple. And that's the kind of models of Solomon temple. And look at this, how large, much bigger. It's like new congregational sort of place that people pay building funds and they can build new temple. And that's fantastic. And then Ezekiel, one of the prophets, actually wrote in his book, a book of Ezekiel, that there will be a third temple at some point. We don't know when it will happen, but it will be, and it's much larger. You can look at the comparison. This is Solomon temple. This is Herod temples, twice as large. And here is Ezekiel's temple. It's really huge. I guess we won't probably see it, but at some point it might be there. And here's a temple. Sorry, not temple. There's a western wall, which is not the wall of the temple, I'm sure you know. It's a retaining wall of a temple mount, of the little hill that on which temple stood. And I want you to pay kind of a little bit attention. Here's the little entrance into the tunnel in that. Again, if you're in Jerusalem, I would highly recommend that you visit that place. And there's a temple mount as on top, and that's where the Dome of the Rock is here. That's the place built from which presumably Muhammad ascended with his horse to the heaven, but that's built on the rock on which Abraham wanted to sacrifice Isaac. That's the cornerstone foundation of the whole Jewish and Christian civilization, on top of which right now that Dome of the Rock is built. And here's a smaller place. It's Al-Aqsa Mosque right there. You can actually go there and visit, not inside but outside. Sometimes it's allowed to do it. That's the western wall. It's right here. That's the place where people pray. Most of it's men. There's a little section for women, and there's a section that anybody can come, presumably, and pray there. You remember I told you to go into that tunnel? The reason you go, you'll see the wall, how big it is. It's underground. You see that's about almost as much as above ground is underground. Not quite. It's about 40% of that. And those are huge rocks, beautiful construction. From there you can go to see Ezekiel's tunnel, where they build for the water coming to Jerusalem during siege of Jerusalem. It's a fascinating story, but that's for unrelated lecture. Now, King Solomon has his flaws too. And here's one of them. He had only 700 wives and 300 concubines. I don't know, he was a busy guy all the time. He really had a large family and large harem at that time. Now, what people say that, and you'll find it in Arabian Nights, books of Arabian Nights, which is a great read for teenagers and young 20-year-old, but you might read it too, that he put genie into the bottle, that King Solomon, and sealed it with his seal. So whenever somebody opens the bottle and genie comes in, no, that's King Solomon put it in there. But because he had that many wives, and it wasn't really acceptable even at those times, that God said that upon your death, the kingdom of Israel will separate into two. And that's exactly what happened. That when he died, his two sons started fighting for being followers, sort of kings of entire Israel, and it separated into northern state, blue-collar state of Israel, kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah. The 10 tribes happened to live in the northern kingdom, and 2, Judah and Benjamin, lived around Jerusalem and in the southern. Why it's kind of important historically, because several years later, first of all, those 2 kingdoms fought each other all the time, or most of the time. There was one of the few, or several, I would say, civil wars in Jewish history. They always fight, and that's one of them. And then eventually Assyrians came in and then conquered Israel, the northern kingdom first. They laid siege to Jerusalem, but then they didn't take Jerusalem, moved back. But what they did, they took people, which is 10 tribes, from the northern kingdom, and they moved them deep into Assyrian territory. That was one of the first ethnic cleansing, so to speak. And then what they did, they brought other nations, other people to replace 10 tribes there. And then they went on the periphery of Assyrian kingdom. And then they moved, and 50 years later, another power arose there, which is Babylonians. They defeated Assyrians. They marched on to kingdom of Judah. First, they didn't take it, but they said, you'll pay us money, we'll leave you alone. But they took the king and some of the nobility, moved them to Babylonian, and appointed King Zedekiah to be a king of Judah. King Zedekiah was okay for about 7 years, and then he made another mistake. He sided up with Egypt here to fight Babylonians, and they've lost that battle. It happens. And then Nebuchadnezzar came again, laid another 2-year siege of Jerusalem, broke the walls of Jerusalem, marched in on Tisha B'Av, or 9th of Av, of month Av, destroyed in 586. They broke into Jerusalem and destroyed that Solomon temple. First temple was destroyed at that point. Now, they also took people away. There was a Babylonian sort of exile. They took a lot of people. There was a distinction, though, between those two, Assyrian and Babylonian. Distinction was that Assyrian put them on the periphery, and they stayed there all the time. And they replaced them with other people. They brought that orange line. And so those tribes that were now located on the periphery of Assyrian Empire moved probably elsewhere. And those are 10 lost tribes of Israel. We'll talk a little bit in a second. Babylonians, however, they brought them into Babylon. They settled them there. They didn't bring everybody. They brought mainly aristocracy, or more of professional people and just left a lot of people behind. And it wasn't that long until Persia took over, and that will allow Jews to return, but that's our next lecture. So where the 10 lost tribes go? What happened to them? Remember in Kingdom of Judah, there was tribe of Judah and tribe of Benjamin. All other tribes kind of disappeared, marched away. From Kingdom of Israel, it's still a big question. People writing books about it, trying to find where there's 10 tribes. Here they say that might be warriors elsewhere, or they might move to another countries and settle there. There is one theory that Native Americans may be the lost tribe of Israel. They walked all the way through Asia, through Bering Sea, and came into Alaska and Canada, and then descended here. Nothing of that is ever proven, obviously, but there are theories. And another theory I want to share with you, like a teaser for my next presentation, is that some people say they went to Europe, those 10 tribes, and they became Englishmen, and they became Anglicans. And that's the story behind those 10 tribes, but we'll discuss it. But that actually created a lot of love for Bible and for other things among Protestant movements in England first and in other places of Europe. And when they eventually come to the United States, there was a very different approach to Jewish faith, to Jewish commandments, and everything else. And we'll talk about that next time. Now, I thank you for attention, and you can applause. And I'll entertain any questions right now, or we can make a break, whatever you want to do.
We're going to take a quick bathroom break, and then we want to have a Q&A. And you can fire any question you want at Boris.
Yes.
As long as it has to do with the content. Or maybe we can get a little bit wider than that. I know that we have a mixed audience here of Christians and Jews, and so maybe you're a Christian in the room and you're going, I didn't understand that Jews saw it that way, or maybe the Jewish people are saying, how do Christians see it? And so we want to invite those sorts of, thank you. Suddenly my voice came on and I was like, whoa, that was great. But so be thinking of those sorts of questions and bring them back, and when we come back, Hallie is going to be back here with the microphone, and she can come to you, and you can ask your question of Boris, and we might bring a few other experts up here on the panel as well. So use the bathroom right out here to the left, bottled water's in the back, and we'll see you back in, let's say, 5 minutes. Father Phil. There's a bathroom downstairs as well, down and on the right when you get to the bottom of the steps. 5 minutes. Let's bring it back in. Shh. I've always watched this work before. If you make that shush sound, people start to take notice. So if everybody could just take their seats. Wonderful. Well, we're graced and blessed to not only have Boris here to be able to answer questions, but we actually have some clergy in the room too. And so I invited Rabbi Rines. If he is able to jump in later and wants to weigh in on a question or an answer, Rabbi, why don't you go ahead and why don't you just come on up? Give Rabbi Rines a quick round of applause. He probably had other things to do with his Tuesday night. So we've got a few people watching on the internet. We're going to get to their questions in a minute. But we want to go ahead and just take questions in the room. And remember, let's try to stick to the subject matter here. But if you've got questions about what, as a Christian, what do Jews believe, or vice versa, those are perfect kinds of questions that we want to be able to ask this evening. Just, be respectful. So with that, if you've got a question, raise your hand. Not all at once. All right. Hallie's coming around. And so we've got our esteemed panel. Why don't you guys come up here? Rabbi Rines, I'm going to turn this over to you. All right. Hallie, you ready? All right, let's go ahead.
What were the two? Judah and Benjamin?
In effect, it's Judah and Benjamin, but it really was Judah, because that's how, as we returned from Babylonian exile, it was the tribe of Judah. And the Persians, like the Greeks after them, wanted to establish a relationship that was on a different level than what the Babylonians or the Assyrians had, or even later on the Romans. That is, they wanted to establish a relationship where there could be an alliance, not to take over the land, but rather to have those who would be your colonists. And so they wanted their frontiers to be protected, and they would allow the various colonies to keep their ancestral laws. Well, what they wanted then was a translation of those ancestral laws. And so we had the opportunity to make a relationship with the Persians. So the Persians, as they learned more about the Jewish people, they said, oh, you're of the tribe of Judah, so we'll refer to your unique faith of monotheism as Judaism. And you, who are Judeans, that's how we'll refer to you. So they were no longer referred to as Israelites, but rather by that tribal name. So there's one other tribe besides the tribe of Judah. And by the way, it wasn't just the tribe of Judah, because when the Assyrians came down and attacked Samaria or to Dan, many of the Israelites from the northern tribes came down. And so if you read biblical criticism, biblical academic research on their theories of the development of the Bible, they would identify certain aspects or prophetic teachings that seemed to come from the northern tribes, but then later on were developed into the Bible that we know it. So as you would know with any kind of conquest of a territory, not everybody would stay there to be conquered. They would leave. So many of them came south into Judah, and so the tribe of Judah did have those from the northern tribes as well. So what's the other tribe besides Judah that survived the Babylonian exile? You guys know it, because you wear them when you're not wearing your suit. The Levites, right? So the Levitical tribes. Now, as Boris mentioned, the Levites did not have a tribal land. They didn't have a territory. Why? Because they were those who served the temple. And from the tribe of Levi, we had a specific branch of it, one family. Those were the Kohanim, literally the Zadokites. And they then were the priests. The Levites were those who served in the temple, made the choir and the service work in the temple. So they didn't have a land, but they persevered. And so to this day, we have those of us who are of the tribe of Judah, or Israel in plural, and those who are the Levites, and those who say they not only are from the tribe of the Levites, but they are also Kohanim. So we still have people in the Jewish community to this day who draw their lineage from the Kohanim. So if you go to certain synagogues, when they call up people for the blessings of the Torah, they'll call the Kohanim, the priestly descendants first, then the Levite, and then those of us who are of the general tribes of Israel.
No, correct. I can't add even a word. But the name comes from that largest tribe of Judah, and there are people from other tribes came in as well. But that's... Yeah.
I just have a secular question.
and that is, what is the definition of time? When somebody lives 900 years, what is that to us today? What does that mean?
So I'll give you one of the theological answers to it, so that for instance, there'll be those who will say, look, according to the Bible, we're the year 5,785. How can that be possible? Well, for the first 6 days of it, the first 4 days of it, we didn't have a sun. We count time by the Earth circumnavigating the sun. So there were those who try to make a scientific explanation of it. But I think, as Boris explained it, it was quite well, and that is how they measured a lifetime is different than how we would measure it. And did human beings live to be 900 years? Well, I'll give you one, and this is as Jews and Christians are coming together. In Judaism, we have, of course, those who read the Bible in a very literalistic way, and those who read it with more of a reference to the academic, right? And so we can agree to disagree with each other. That being the case, we all look at the Bible, Jews, whether they're Orthodox, conservative, or Reform, or academic, we all look at the Bible saying, what is really happening here is God is giving us instruction and insights to human nature and the essence, the significance, the meaning of life itself. We have urges within us. We have passions within us. And sometimes those passions will drive us to do criminal things, hurtful things, selfish things, egotistical things. And if you read the Bible, it's right there. It says, look at you. Even the finest among you can misbehave. And as Boris said so beautifully, why did the Bible include that in there? So that it's real. So that no one would look at the ancient world and say, they were all perfect, but we're miserable. No, they also had the same challenges. The Bible is there as God's way to connect with us. And one of the things, if you want to look about Jews and Christians, is that brothers in the Bible frequently fought each other. Right? Why did the Bible start with the first family of Cain and Abel fighting against each other? Well, it was to tell us that brothers, sibling rivalries, and if some of you had a brother or a sister, you know exactly what that means, right? Sibling rivalries can be very dangerous, can be very hurtful. And the Bible wants us to look at that and learn from it and saying, look, you have differences of opinion, you have different perspectives, that's okay. But you start with love. You can disagree with one another, but start with love. And I know that Father Phil will make reference to this, and Jared will make reference to this. And when Boris started, he said the most significant line that we have, the first phrase, and that's chapter 12 of the book of Genesis. It says, Lech Lecha, right? What follows there, Father? You know this. God said to Avram, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. The brothers and sisters who fight and curse one another, they bring down the world on their own heads. What we are learning now, Jews and Christians, is that it's time for us to bless each other, for us to look at each other, learn from this lesson that God has given us. Not how many years people lived or all of the theological implications of that and the other. These are real lessons that God is speaking into your heart. And that's what makes it sacred. It's real from each person's perspective.
Good question for Boris. Boris has written a book on Jewish DNA. And I just wondered, since I read it, but I'm sorry, I apologize, I've forgotten a lot of it. Is there...
So did I.
So I'm wondering if I should ask you. But anyway, is there any DNA population movement statistics that correlate with any of the movement of ancient Jewish populations?
It's a very, very good question. It's very difficult to answer because we don't really have ancient DNA to compare. we compare to the pool of DNA of current people, when that DNA study began 50, 70, 80 years ago. So we have contemporary. We have some cadaveral DNA that's extracted, but it's not going that far as ancient Hebrews. So the comparison eventually says that there's more similarity in Jewish DNA, regardless of where these Jews live, in Morocco or Yemen or in any place, and Ashkenazi Jews, than between Jewish DNA and non-Jewish DNA. Well, more or less, it's still percentage type situation. It's not totally defined. So the book that I wrote, I title it with a question mark, Are We All Cousins? And the answer is, I don't know. There is a potential, significant potential that we are, but it's by any means not even 50 or 60% of that.
Boris,
Yes.
to go along with that, someone online asked, is there any way to prove if someone's from the lost 10 tribes? Jerry, you can ask that question.
Yeah, I can repeat it. Is there any way to prove that someone is from the lost tribe? And that's exactly what we just discussed. The answer to Benny's question is, if you take DNA of, let's say, Ethiopian Jews or Indian Jews, they will have more similarities with other Jewish tribes than with surrounding nations. There is another, so you can't say for sure, that there is no way of saying for sure, but there are more chances. There's more chances if someone has Kohen DNA that he indeed belongs to Kohen families of that. But it doesn't prove 100% either. So it's a possibility there, but you can't go beyond that.
Hi. I was wondering, and this sort of builds upon that. You'd mentioned some of the prolific exploits of Solomon, 700 wives, 300 concubines, or something like that.
Quite a few.
Yeah, a little too many, I would say. But I was sort of interested in one of them, which is from the land of Sheba.
Yes.
Becoming, nowadays modern Ethiopia.
Yes.
And I was wondering, what are some of the current views on the Ethiopian Jews, and are they like descendants of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon?
Ethiopian Jews have that legend that they all come from that union of Queen Sheba and King Solomon. Although she was not one of his wives, she was not even a concubine, she came for advice. And came out pregnant, and she delivered a baby who became first king of the long-lasting dynasty with Emperor Selassie, who was killed by Marxists in 60s or 70s. He was the last emperor of that dynasty. So that's their legend. Now, the Yemenite Jews claim that Sheba was with them rather than with Ethiopians. So I can't say for sure, but if you go by their legend, there is some truth in that there might be descendants of.
There was a lot of cross-cultural movement and military movement between what we would call Ethiopia and Yemen back in the day. So it's hard to tell, but when people, as Boris mentioned, I think is very correct, when people have a message or a lesson, a myth that is so ancient, it's I think too cynical just to dismiss it as without merit. Rather, you pause, you appreciate it. You don't have to, there's no way for us to prove it or disprove it, but there is, and to this day, a very strong community of Jews who are coming from Ethiopia, and of course also from Yemen. And when they knew that there was an independent Israel, the opportunity for them to come back to this land of their ancestors, many of them walked thousands of miles through the most hostile territory in order to make it. You don't get that kind of commitment and that kind of connection from a fairy tale. This is something that's in their DNA.
And you know, it's kind of interesting, it's unrelated to that, but Amharic language is a Semitic language. And Amharic tribe, which is is people in Hebrew, and Harik in mountains. And they live in mountains of Ethiopia. So there is some connection in general with Ethiopians. You know, the other kind of explanation, academic explanation, is that a lot of men, Jewish men, came to different countries and married local women who might have converted to Judaism with them. And so the gene pool became mixed from that. And then the next generation obviously married local people as well. And so it kind of dilutes itself as we go forward. And there are so many generations passed, so it's hard to say.
Raise your hand if you have questions, so we can see your hands again. A couple over here. Yeah, keep those up.
Keep those up.
Thank you very much for such an interesting evening. I have a question about what are called Marrano Jews.
Yes.
Can you explain that and enlighten us as to whether it's legitimate and there's basis
Thank you.
for it?
I'll take a second because it's a subject of my second lecture. I hope you all show up on September 2nd. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but thank you for this question. And Marana is obviously, it's kind of derogatory term for conversos who were either forcefully converted or converted because of circumstances didn't allow them to maintain Judaism. But Sephardic Jews do have a lot of similarity genetically with other Jewish groups. There's no question about that.
But the Marranos, the conversos that we've had in the United States and in Central America, from Mexico all the way down to South America, many of them do very much have a root in the Jewish people. And I'll give you a great example of it. One of the big migrations from Europe to South America was first by the Dutch, who established one of their trading capitals in what is modern-day Brazil, called Recife. It was, many of these maritime traders were Jewish sponsors, and many Jews took their opportunity to get the heck out of Europe. They came to Recife, and when the Portuguese came and brought the Inquisition to Brazil, many of those members of that Dutch Recife community in Brazil, they went north, and they helped to establish a capital in what would be North America. They called it originally New Amsterdam, which when the English took it over, they renamed it, which was? New York. So the movement of Jews from the Inquisition-dominated people, that being Portugal and Spain for the most part, came to the Americas really very, very early. And so there is, even those who didn't migrate to North America, who didn't come to New Amsterdam, eventually many of them came up to North America, and they maintained certain traditions in which the people of the normal Catholic Church would say, well, why are you avoiding eating pork on Fridays? Why are you lighting certain candles here? Why do you have certain Hebrew traditions? And then as it unfolds, even though it was 400 or 500 years from 1492 on, many of them had maintained this connection. And it's only now, today, many of them are reaching out to our community saying, can we reestablish our connection to the Jewish people, our family?
Yeah, I know, Chuck, of one kind of colleague of mine, although not from Denver, from East Coast, whose name was Caro, Jose Caro. And his family during World War II immigrated from Spain to Uruguay. And although they were Catholics, they just didn't like fascist regime, whatever in Spain, moved there. But Jewish community of Uruguay received them because they were descendant of Rabbi Caro, who wrote Shulchan Aruch and all that stuff. So there is a lot of connection. There's a lot of kind of interactions between those two. There was a young woman there with her hand up.
Well, I had a question on the temple described by Ezekiel. Was it ever built?
Oh, probably not.
That's a prophecy for the time to come. That one day, as Boris mentioned, when the Mashiach comes and transforms all of civilization so that our swords are turned into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks, and nations will lo yamadu od milchama, they'll no longer learn war, then at that point, God's angelic host will inspire us to build a temple in which all people will come and flock to receive the blessings of God. But it's a prophecy that hasn't come down yet, although if you look in your calendar in the year to come.
Here's,
She's coming to you. She's bringing the microphone.
keep your hand up.
Keep your hand up.
That's
I'll
right.
lose you in the crowd.
I'm not sure how to phrase this, and if I'm saying stuff wrong, just let me know. But you had mentioned when the Assyrians took the people out, that it was what you could see as an ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
And, we know that has been going on forever. And are you going to, at some point, address all the different ethnic cleansing? No, that wasn't. Anyhow, are you going to address the anti-Semitism, I guess, throughout the ages?
Yeah, the way the course is designed is to address it eventually, but not by me. My second and final lecture on that course will be on diaspora, Jewish diaspora, history of how those 10 tribes or other tribes dissipated, and then how they came back, and then what happened with the Spanish Jews maybe, and Italian Jews and so on. But I will be touching upon a little bit of anti-Semitism, but not much. But other guys, I'm sure, will.
It'll get in there, don't worry. I'm that voice from stage right. Okay, this is the lightning round. Just a few questions from our
wow.
folks that are watching online. So you have 30 seconds or less. For Rabbi, we can give you 60. First question, is the historicity of the Bible important in Judaism? Because they're saying it is to Christians when they read the Bible. So how do you feel about the historicity of the Bible, the provable historicity?
The historicity, and I think Boris mentioned it quite well, and that is, it's not a book of history. And though it has a creation of the universe, and it talks about the development of beings, it's not a book of science. It is very much a book that is enabling us to connect directly with God, which, by the way, is the origin of Protestant faith, from the Anglicans, from onward, because they wanted to make sure that people had a translation of the Bible, that individual churches could read the Bible, certainly within Judaism. But that's what we do from the very beginning. We want our children to learn Hebrew so that they can connect directly with the Bible, that when they become a bar bat mitzvah, they come up and they read the Bible and they interpret it in a way. So it's not a book of history for us. It's rather a book that connects us directly. And those of you who do Bible study, I'm sure that many of you have felt this. When you are studying the Bible, all of a sudden you look up and you go, oh my God, it's been two hours I've been studying. And the time goes like this, because you are transported to a whole different world. You are connecting on the highest of levels, not as a book of history, because in a book of history you're reading it for 10 minutes and you're falling asleep. But as a book that connects you with God, and you can connect with that for a lifetime.
Good answer.
Yeah, I can only add one thing in the 15 seconds, that in Israel, Tanakh, or Bible study, is a part of school education. So people study history as history, and there is a class of studying a Bible. So it's not necessarily the same as Rabbi just explained to you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna turn the corner a little bit with questions. We have Christians and Jews in the room. I've mentioned that about 100 times now. But the thing that I feel like I first learned was how to interact with my Jewish friends, and maybe there are some phrases that Christians should stay away from. Or some maybe some things that Christians do or say or think that just come out of our mouths, and for the Jewish person, you're kind of taken aback. What would those things be?
I don't.
You can have 30 minutes.
No,
by the way.
no, but I don't connect with that premise, because within Judaism, again, each of us are reading this Bible and have a connection with God, and we are. When I wake up in the morning, I recite my morning blessings, includes the blessing for the study of Torah. And I say, La'asok b'divrei Torah. God, thank you for the opportunity to engage with words of Torah. Not to memorize it, not to repeat it, but to engage it, to involve my entire body with it. My emotions, my intellect, my spirit, and all the rest. And so I then take it for granted that everybody else, of different faiths too, when they read this Bible, they too will have a very unique and sacred connection with it. So when we are studying together, it goes without saying that we'll have different perspectives. And we might stumble over some verbiage. We might say some things that will shake my perspective and back and forth. That is too a Jewish connection. When we study, seldom is it considered to be ideal to study alone, although of course, we do study individually, but the ideal is to study in chavrusa, with a chavara, with a study partner. And why would you study with a partner? Because you want that other person to challenge you, to shake your presuppositions as to what this means. And by having my perspective challenged, I sharpen it, I am enriched by it, and we do that to each other. So I don't think that there are questions or perspectives or verbiage that is beyond the pale. What we'll do then, we'll start to discuss it, and then we'll evolve so that we can communicate more respectfully. But you got to do so with candor, because then if you, how many here are married? Or you know married people. So if you're in a loving romantic relationship, right? What makes it loving is that you can have a conversation of some depth, right? If you're always, on the first date, everything, you're always talking in the most sweet way, and you're building up your resume, right? Right? And you're not going to challenge it on the first date, the second or third either. But after a couple of years of marriage, right, you can't have a relationship in which you're not willing and open enough to share candidly. Gently, sensitively, yes. But you have to have a conversation. And that's part of this as well. We're not going to agree on everything. So what? Brothers and sisters are not put on earth to agree with each other, but to love each other.
That's good. Boris?
No, I can't add anything to it. That's what it is.
Well, that was a very gracious answer. Okay. Would you rather be called Jews or Jewish, or for Christians, should we call you Jewish people? Because I know there's the Jews, right, quote unquote, that usually has something negative and derogatory behind it. What do you prefer?
Yeah, I am a Jew, and my religious spiritual expression is of Judaism, and I'm of the Jewish people. So all the above is perfectly fine for me.
Depends
Boris.
on the context. But it's all acceptable. If it's in a friendly, normal conversation, that's all.
So from a Jewish point of view to Christians, we would say, well, you're Christian, so certainly you as Anglicans would get along famously with others who would call themselves Christians, like Catholics. Well, that was not always the case, right? And so Catholics and Anglicans, who actually have quite a bit in common, right, would not be nearly as simpatico with some who would call themselves Christians that we would think, oh, they're Christians, but you would say, no, they're not Christians at all, they're Mormons. And so it was like, so there's all kinds of identities that go in a subtle expression that those who are not of that faith community may not get, but you would. But you'll inform us and teach that to us too.
I like it. Well, and that's why we're going to meet week after week from now until 2020, whatever. But here's what we're going to do. It's 8:10. We promised that we'd have you out here by 8:30. We want to give some time for mingling and talking. Any final words from Boris and Rabbi? I'm sorry, I about called you Rabbi Shields.
Rhines, I know.
That's your
He's the other
coworker.
one.
It's
Rabbi
the
Rhines.
next generation.
Oh, there's one. Yes.
I have said to my Christian friends, such and such, my Mormon neighbor, is a Christian, and she was very upset with me. So to me, they follow Jesus Christ or however. I'm talking about the dogma. So I have noticed that some of my Christian friends, so I stuck my foot in my mouth that day. So I don't know. So my question is, do all my Christian friends, I say they're Christian, but maybe not.
We've got an Anglican right here.
So I'll field this one quickly.
Help you so much.
So for Christians, a key thing is that we believe that Jesus of Nazareth is fully God and fully man. That he is not a created being, but he's fully God. He's God incarnate. This is essential to the Christian faith. That God is with us, Emmanuel. God is with us. And this is codified, finally protected in the words of the Nicene Creed, which Christians from all the liturgical traditions say every single Sunday when we gather for worship. So the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, they reject this. So to Mormons, Jesus is the first of God's creatures, created before time itself, but Jesus is a creature. They call him the Redeemer. He atones for our sins and so on. But in Mormon theology, Jesus is a creature. So for those of you of the Christian faith, we would recognize Mormons as being closest to the ancient heresy that was dealt with at the Council of Nicaea. They're Arians, if you know what I mean. I'm using, this was a big dispute about who Jesus is and the relationship of Jesus to the Father. So Mormons, by definition, reject that Jesus is the immortal and eternal. All right, so that's the key. And then they refer to the Council of Nicaea as the great they call it the great apostasy. So the turning away from the faith. So for us in the Catholic or universal tradition, the Nicene Creed defines what it means to be a Christian, but the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, by definition, rejects the Council of Nicaea and calls it a great apostasy. That's why they have a separate priesthood, a separate temple, separate baptism, everything. So there's a lot that we hold in common, but no incarnation, no Christianity. So this is why we would say, no, Mormons are not Christians. Okay?
I feel like this really fits with so many jokes. We got priests and rabbis and pastors and Boris.
And Boris.
It's so good.
Priest and rabbi.
We could be here for hours, but we'll come back in 2 weeks. So,
What can be better?
Boris, You're speaking again in 2 weeks.
In
Tuesday,
2
September.
or 3 weeks, or whatever. it
2
is.
weeks. Tuesday, September 2nd?
Second.
2nd. I don't want to get the date wrong. At the back by the water bottles, as well as on some of the sheets that Hallie's holding up, you can see and take pictures of the schedule. There's a QR code to sign up and register for the next class. It will be here. Boris will be speaking again, and it'll be even better than this time, so make sure and come. And we want you guys to keep coming, and please keep inviting people. As you can see, we still have a few seats left, so you're more than welcome to keep inviting, and we're just glad that you came. I think this is really good. It was enriching. I think we all learned a lot, so thank you all for coming. Yeah, sure, round of applause.
Thank you, thank you.
Boris, if people want to get your book.
No, I want to thank Rabbi Ryan
Yes.
because he saved me when the questions came along.
Boris, if people want to get your book, what's the name of the book, if you can remember?
Yeah, I do. It's Are We All Cousins?
Are We All Cousins?
But that's how history and genetics define Jewish people.
Wonderful. Okay, everyone's dismissed. Make sure
I
you get
can-
a
I
copy
can
of the
bring it.
calendar. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, yeah, it's your pen. I have to